I always thought Christmas was the one day of the year when conflict paused, when even the most fractured families managed to pretend everything was fine. But that illusion shattered the moment I walked into my parents' house and felt the tension settle on my shoulders like cold ash. Something was wrong. I didn't know what yet, but the air had a heaviness I couldn't ignore. I'd barely taken off my coat when my dad's eyes locked onto me, not with warmth or curiosity, but with a strange, hungry intensity I'd never seen before. It felt like being studied, evaluated, measured for something I didn't understand. And deep down, a small voice whispered that I wasn't there for family or tradition. I was there for something they wanted. As the night unfolded, every smile felt forced, every gesture rehearsed, every word coated with a sweetness that tasted like poison. I sensed the storm building long before the first crack in their facade appeared. I didn't know what they were hiding, but I could feel the weight of it pressing against the walls, begging to be exposed. By the time they finally told me what they expected from me, I realized Christmas wasn't the celebration I had walked into. It was the trap they had prepared. And what I uncovered that night didn't just change dinner. It changed everything. So ask yourself, how far would you go when the people meant to protect you cross a line they can never step back from? Before everything that happened at that Christmas dinner, my life was stable. Not extraordinary, not perfect, but mine. I'd carved out a rhythm I was proud of, a quiet apartment filled with plants I somehow managed not to kill, a steady job that didn't drain my soul, and a sense of independence I'd worked for years to build. I wasn't wealthy, but I was comfortable, and that comfort came from knowing I was responsible for every inch of progress I'd made. Most mornings started the same. I'd wake before sunrise, wrap my fingers around a warm mug of coffee, and watch the city slowly stretch awake beneath my balcony. There was something reassuring about those early hours, like life held its breath just long enough for me to gather myself. I'd think about the budget I meticulously planned, the goals I set at the start of each month, and the promise I made to myself years ago, never depend on anyone else again. That promise didn't come from bitterness. It came from experience. Growing up with my parents meant walking on eggshells more often than walking on solid ground. They weren't cruel, not in the traditional sense, but they were unpredictable. Money came and went like water through cupped hands, always vanishing, always with excuses and reassurances that things would get better next month. As a kid, I learned to expect disappointment before hope. So when I finally moved out, built savings, created routines, I felt like I was reborn. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. I had friends I could trust, coworkers who valued me, and future plans that didn't involve cleaning up anyone else's mistakes. Yet, even in that peace, there were moments when a familiar anxiety crept in, messages from my mom asking if I was doing well financially, random calls from my dad that lasted just long enough for him to steer the conversation toward money, hints dropped like crumbs about their new business ventures. I always brushed them off. After all, families worry, right? They check in. They stay connected. But sometimes their questions felt too pointed, too rehearsed. And sometimes, when I visited, I'd catch them exchanging quick glances, as if they'd discussed something just before I arrived. I didn't want to read it. I didn't want to think that maybe the stability I built made me a target instead of a daughter to be proud of. So I ignored it. I brushed away the unease and focused on the life I'd worked so hard to build. On my ability to stand on my own. On the fact that I was finally free from the constant financial chaos that colored my childhood. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was quietly unraveling behind the scenes. A week before Christmas, my dad called me for the third time in a single day, something he hadn't done in years. His voice was too cheerful, too warm, like he was trying on an emotion that didn't quite fit him. He insisted I come home for dinner, saying the whole family would be there, that it would be just like old times. The invitation felt more like a command dressed in tinsel and good intentions. I hesitated, but guilt has a way of nudging you into obligations you know you shouldn't accept. So I agreed. The days leading up to Christmas were normal enough on the surface, but inside me, something felt off, like the calm before a storm I couldn't see yet. I caught myself replaying old memories, Moments when my parents' financial desperation leaked into their decisions. Times when I felt more like a safety net than a daughter. Still, I convinced myself I was overthinking. I reminded myself it was Christmas. People softened during the holidays. Families tried. Maybe this was their way of rebuilding something broken. But deep down, beneath the rationalizations and the guilt, a quieter truth lingered. My family had a history of letting desperation lead them down reckless paths. And I had a feeling they were heading down one again. Only this time, the path led straight to me. I didn't know the details yet. I didn't know the scale of what they'd hidden or the danger wrapped inside it. But I could feel it approaching, slow and deliberate, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. And that moment, whether I was ready or not, was waiting for me at that Christmas table. The moment I stepped through my parents' front door on Christmas Day, the tension hit me like a wall. The lights were bright, the decorations carefully arranged, the smell of roasted turkey drifting from the kitchen, but beneath all of it was an undercurrent I couldn't name yet. It felt staged, like a scene set up for someone else's benefit. And deep down, I sensed that someone was me. My mother greeted me with a hug that lingered a second too long, her voice higher than usual, trembling on the edges. My dad hovered behind her, watching me with a look that wasn't relief or excitement. It was calculation. A kind of hungry expectation he didn't bother to hide. I told myself I was imagining it, but the pit in my stomach tightened anyway. Dinner started smoothly enough. They asked polite questions about my job, my routine, and my plans for the next year. But every topic circled back to money. My mom kept saying how proud she was of how responsibly I managed my finances, how impressive my savings habits were, and how lucky I was to be so stable. Each comment felt like a probe, a gentle push towards something unsaid. I answered carefully, trying not to reveal more than I needed to. I'd learned long ago that my financial security made them uneasy, maybe even resentful. But that night, it felt different.
Urgent.
Like they weren't just curious. They were preparing for something. The first crack appeared when my dad mentioned a family business opportunity. His voice sharpened when I didn't immediately react. He painted it as an investment, something that could benefit all of us, something that required someone responsible to help get it off the ground. The more he talked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a casual discussion. This was a pitch. My pulse quickened. Asked what kind of business he was talking about, and he exchanged a glance with my mom, one of those silent conversations they'd mastered. When she nodded, he finally said it. It's a way for us to pay off some temporary debts.
Debts.
The word rang in my ears like a warning bell. My heart tightened, memories of their past financial disasters flashing through my mind. Whenever they said temporary, it meant catastrophic. Whenever they said pay off, it meant they were already drowning. I tried to stay calm and asked what kind of debt. My dad avoided the question at first, talking about unexpected expenses and unfair circumstances. But the more he dodged, the more obvious the truth became. They hadn't called me here for dinner. They'd called me here for a bailout. Still, I wasn't prepared for how direct it would get. Halfway through dessert, my dad set down his fork and looked straight at me. His tone shifted, the friendliness melting away, replaced with something cold and entitled. We need access to your savings, he said. My breath caught. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. But he didn't stop. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes narrowing as though analyzing a business proposition. You're doing well. You have more than you need. And we're parents. It's your responsibility to help us. The audacity stunned me into silence. My mom sat beside him, wringing her hands, her gaze bouncing between us like she was afraid to interfere. But she wasn't denying it. She wasn't stopping him. She was letting this happen. I felt something inside me shift, a mix of betrayal, anger, disbelief. They hadn't invited me home for Christmas out of love. They'd lured me into a trap, hoping holiday sentiment would soften me, hoping guilt would override common sense, hoping I'd hand over the life I'd spent years building. When I didn't respond immediately, my dad's tone hardened. We know how much money you have, he added quietly. My heart dropped. How could they possibly know? He explained it casually like it was nothing. On a visit months ago, he'd accidentally seen a bank notification on my phone screen. The number stuck with him, and ever since, they'd been planning. Suddenly, all the strange questions, the invasive calls, the forced concern made sense. They'd been waiting for the right moment. And Christmas, wrapped in nostalgia, expectations, and pressure, was the perfect chance to corner me. I pushed my plate away, unable to keep my voice steady. I told them it wasn't happening. That my savings were mine, earned through sacrifices they didn't make. That I had my own future to worry about. My dad's expression darkened instantly. The disappointment twisted into something uglier, like anger layered with entitlement. But beneath it all, I saw fear. Real fear. And in that moment, I realized something even worse was hiding behind his request, something they hadn't confessed yet. I asked again what kind of debt they were in. This time, I raised my voice. I didn't let him dodge. That was when my mom broke. Her voice cracked as she blurted it out. "It's the casino." My stomach dropped. Their debt wasn't temporary. It wasn't manageable. It wasn't a few missed bills. It was gambling. Addictive. Dangerous. Spiraling gambling. She explained through tears that it had started as a harmless game, then escalated after a few wins. My dad tried to justify it, saying he'd been on the verge of a big break, that he could fix everything with just a little more time. But the truth seeped through their excuses. Their losses weren't small. They were massive. And the casino hadn't been patient. They'd received warnings, visits, threats. And suddenly, the entire evening snapped into horrifying clarity. This wasn't desperation. This was survival. They needed my money not to pay bills, not to fix a mistake, but to make dangerous people disappear. They hadn't just mismanaged their finances. They'd gambled their lives into a corner. My emotions tangled. Fear, anger, betrayal. But at the center was a cold realization. They expected me to abandon my future to save them from the consequences of their choices. Again. And this time, I refused. When I said no a second time, firmer than before, something in my dad snapped. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood up, slamming his hand onto the table. He called me selfish, ungrateful, accused me of abandoning my family. He said I owed them everything, and that refusing to help was a betrayal. The irony nearly choked me. My mom sobbed, begging me to reconsider, insisting the debt collectors wouldn't wait. She described late-night phone calls, knocks on the door, people following them. Each detail is worse than the last. But even then, they weren't remorseful. They weren't taking responsibility. They just wanted a lifeline, mine. For years, I'd been their backup plan. This time, I wasn't going to be. I grabbed my coat, ignoring their shouts. My dad tried to block the doorway, insisting we talk like a family, but his version of talking meant cornering me until I broke. I stepped around him, shaking with adrenaline, and walked out without looking back. The cold air outside hit me like a slap, but the deeper cold came from the truth I finally accepted. They wouldn't stop. Not after tonight. Not after seeing how much I had. Not after knowing how desperate they were. I drove home with my mind racing, my hands trembling on the wheel. Every mile between us felt like a breath of clarity. But with each breath came a darker realization. If they were willing to ambush me on Christmas, what else were they willing to do? And what exactly had they gotten themselves into? That night, long after midnight, I opened my laptop and began digging into casino records, local rumors, debt forums. I needed answers. I needed proof. And what I discovered didn't just confirm my suspicions. It ignited the spark of something I'd never felt so powerfully before. Not fear. Not grief. Revenge. They wanted to drag me into their chaos. But instead, I was about to expose the truth they'd tried to bury. And what came next would change everything, not just for them, but for anyone who ever thought I could be manipulated again. The days after Christmas felt unreal, like I was walking through a fog that thickened each time I uncovered a new piece of the truth. Every article, every forum thread, every whispered rumor pointed to the same thing. my parents weren't just in debt. They were entangled with a casino known for predatory lending, under-the-table deals, and consequences that didn't involve polite reminders or late fees. This wasn't a financial mistake. It was a crisis waiting to swallow all of us. But instead of drowning in fear, something inside me hardened. My entire childhood had been shaped by their reckless decisions, evictions, empty promises, sudden disappearances of money I'd saved. I'd spent years rebuilding myself from the rubble of their choices. And now they wanted to destroy everything again?
No, not this time.
Revenge didn't come to me as a sudden impulse. It settled in slowly, like frost spreading across a window. I wasn't going to hurt them physically or sabotage their lives beyond repair. But I was going to take back control. I was going to expose everything they'd been hiding, and I was going to make sure they had no way to manipulate me again. The opportunity came faster than I expected. 3 days after Christmas, my mom called me. Her voice was shaky, exhausted, as though she hadn't slept since the dinner. She said they needed to talk. She said things were worse. She begged me to come. Part of me wanted to hang up. But another part, the part that had been digging, researching, preparing, knew this was the moment I'd been waiting for. I agreed. But I wasn't going alone. Hours before meeting them, I gathered everything: screenshots of public debt records, notes from former gamblers who dealt with the same casino, documentation proving the casino's illegal practices, and most importantly, a recording app ready to capture every word. I wasn't just confronting them. I was building a shield. Evidence. Protection. And a weapon. When I arrived at their house, the front door was cracked open. The living room was dimly lit, the air thick with tension. My mom sat on the edge of the couch, red-eyed and trembling. My dad stood by the window, arms crossed, jaw clenched. The moment I stepped in, their eyes flicked to me with a mix of guilt, panic, and expectation. Before either of them spoke, I hit a record. They didn't notice. My mom launched into a frantic explanation: how the casino had raised the stakes, how the collectors had shown up again, how they were running out of time. My dad paced behind her, interrupting to insist that their plan could still work if I just helped them. His voice was desperate, but still laced with the same arrogance from Christmas night. They hadn't changed. They weren't sorry. They were cornered, and they saw me as their exit. I let them talk. I let their words fill the room. I let the truth spill out in raw, panicked confessions. And when they finally paused, expecting sympathy, expecting surrender, I took out my tablet and placed it on the coffee table. Their eyes followed the motion, confused. Then the screen lit up. Bank records, debt summaries, casino documentation, threat reports. Everything they'd tried to hide. My mom gasped. My dad froze mid-step. I spoke slowly, deliberately, letting every word cut through the air like a blade. I told them I knew everything. Every lie, every reckless decision, every secret trip back to the casino they swore they'd never visit again. I told them I knew about the debt collectors, the hidden warnings, the money they'd borrowed behind each other's backs. My dad tried to interrupt, but I talked over him for the first time in my life. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I am not your safety net, I said. I am not your scapegoat. And I'm not here to be threatened or guilt ever again. Their faces changed, my mom's crumbling into fear, my dad's twisting into anger. That was when I played the recording. Their own confessions filled the room. Their desperation. Their lies. Their intentions. Every word, captured clearly. My dad lunged forward to grab the device, but I stepped back. And this time, I wasn't the scared kid trying to avoid conflict. I was in control. I told them that this recording, along with every document I'd gathered, was already backed up and secured. If they ever tried to manipulate me again, if they threatened, pressured, or approached me for money, the evidence would go to the authorities, to the casino's legal department, and to the people actively hunting them. The color drained from my dad's face. He opened his mouth to yell, but the words never formed. My mom sobbed into her hands, realizing just how far things had gone, and how much further I was willing to go to protect myself. For a long moment, The room was silent except for her shaking breaths. Then, I delivered the part of my revenge I'd spent days crafting. I told them that I had already spoken with a debt counselor and a legal advisor. I had arranged for their debts to be transferred into a formal repayment plan under strict supervision. If they complied with every requirement, they would lose control of their finances. They would report every transaction. They would undergo mandatory counseling. And most importantly, they would have no access to me. No requests. No contact. No manipulation.
I wasn't saving them. I was saving myself from them.
My dad exploded then, shouting that I had no right, that I was ruining their lives. But his voice broke midway, cracking under the weight of his own fear. My mom pleaded for another chance, for things to go back to the way they were. But the way things were had never been real. I told them I was done being the daughter who fixed everything. I told them they could either accept the plan or face the collectors alone. And then, with a calm I didn't recognize in myself, I told them the truth they never expected to hear. This is the last time I will ever be in this house. My dad stiffened, but he didn't stop me when I walked to the door. My mom reached for me, but her hand fell short, trembling in the air between us. I stepped outside. A cold wind hit my face, but for the first time, it didn't feel harsh. It felt clean. And as I walked away, leaving their closing door behind me, one thought echoed in my mind, a thought that held both triumph and sorrow, both ending and beginning. Sometimes the hardest revenge isn't destruction. It's finally choosing yourself. The real impact of that decision? Well, that came after. Walking away from my parents' house that night should have felt like a clean break, like closing a door on years of chaos and stepping into a calmer life. But revenge is never that simple. It doesn't come with a neat ending or a sudden wave of relief. Instead, it settles into you slowly, echoing through every quiet moment afterward. And in the days that followed, I learned just how heavy, even necessary, justice can feel. For the first time in years, my phone stayed silent. No frantic calls, no guilt-laced messages, no last-minute pleas wrapped in emotional manipulation. My parents had finally understood the one truth they never wanted to face. I wasn't their lifeline anymore. And that silence, as unsettling as it was at first, became the beginning of freedom. The repayment plan I'd arranged through the advisor began almost immediately. They hated it, of course. Losing control over their finances stripped away the illusion they'd been hiding behind for years. But they complied, because they had no choice. The casino couldn't ignore a formal legal structure, and the collectors couldn't pursue them while debts were under monitored protection. The plan didn't erase the damage they'd caused, but it created a barrier, a boundary, a consequence. And for once, those consequences didn't fall on me. I didn't follow every update or check in with the advisor beyond what was necessary. I no longer felt responsible for saving them, smoothing over their messes, or cushioning their downfall. That responsibility had been the chain around my neck since childhood, the weight I'd mistaken for loyalty. Breaking that chain didn't destroy me, it rebuilt me. Yet, beneath the strength I felt, there was something deeper too, a quiet ache. Revenge isn't joy. It's clear. It forces you to see people not as you wish they were, but as they truly are. And that truth, it's hard to live with. I grieved the version of my parents I'd always hoped would exist. The supportive father, the steady mother, the family that would have celebrated my independence instead of trying to consume it. Letting go of them, not physically but emotionally, was the hardest part of everything. But it was also the most liberating. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding myself. I poured energy into my work, my friendships, my routines. I started therapy again, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to understand the lingering guilt and the choices I'd made. I learned to recognize that protecting myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. It was maturity. It was the kind of strength I had spent my whole life earning. Slowly, the fear faded. Then the anger. Then the noise. What remained was something I hadn't felt in years: peace. But the true impact of what happened didn't hit me until one evening, months later, when I received a letter from my mother. Her handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged like She'd rewritten the note several times. Inside wasn't an apology, not fully, but something close enough to crack the wall I'd built. She wrote that the plan had forced them to confront their problem, that the casino had been their escape from stress, their misguided attempt to fix everything quickly. She admitted they'd used me as a shortcut because it was easier than facing their own failures. She said losing access to me was the consequence they deserved, but the one they feared most. She ended the letter with a line that stayed with me. "You saved us, even when you thought you were saving yourself."
I didn't respond.
I wasn't ready. But for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt distance, a healthy distance, and a sort of compassion that didn't require closeness. That's the thing nobody tells you about revenge. The act itself isn't the ending. The impact is what comes after. It's the way you learn who you are without fear. It's the way you finally see the line between love and loyalty, and how sometimes walking away is the only way to protect both. My story isn't about punishing my parents. It's about reclaiming myself from years of emotional debt I never volunteered to carry. It's about understanding that justice doesn't always look like revenge. It sometimes looks like boundaries, truth, and the courage to leave the room where you were being diminished. And here's the part one want you, the person watching my story, to understand. Revenge isn't always loud. It isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes, revenge is choosing peace over chaos, your future over their crisis, your healing over their comfort. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do to someone who tried to break you is to show them you're no longer breakable. So let me ask you this, because every person listening has their own scars, their own betrayals, their own moments where they were pushed too far. What do you think is the real victory? Hurting someone who hurt you, or finally becoming someone they can never control again? And more importantly, what would you choose if it meant reclaiming your entire life?